Think about the person who broke your heart the most. The one you couldn't let go of, even though the relationship hurt. That connection wasn't love. It was your inner child recognizing a familiar wound, and calling it chemistry. And until you understand this, every relationship will feel different. But end the same. The inner child wound that shapes all your adult relationships is not the one you talk about the most. It is not always the obvious trauma. More often, it is something quieter, more subtle, and therefore more powerful. It is the wound of emotional disconnection. Not necessarily abandonment in the literal sense, but the experience of not being fully met as you were. Not being mirrored. Not being emotionally attuned to in the way a developing nervous system needs. As a child, you did not need perfect parents. You needed presence. You needed someone to notice when something shifted inside you. When you were overwhelmed. When you were hurt. When you were confused. When that didn't happen consistently, you adapted. And that adaptation became the blueprint for your adult relationships. The inner child wound forms when you learn that closeness is unpredictable. Sometimes it is there, sometimes it disappears. Sometimes love feels warm, and sometimes it feels distant, conditional, or emotionally unavailable. Your system learns to stay alert. From that point on, relationships stop being places of rest. They become places of effort. As a child, you may have learned to become hyper-aware of others. You watched moods. You adjusted your behavior. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. You learned how to keep the connection stable. This is not weakness. It is intelligence. But intelligence formed under emotional pressure becomes pattern. In adulthood, this wound often expresses itself through attraction. You are not drawn to what feels safe. You are drawn to what feels familiar. Familiarity does not mean healthy. It means recognizable. You may find yourself magnetically pulled toward people who are emotionally inconsistent. People who give attention, then withdraw it. People who are warm one moment and distant the next. Your nervous system recognizes this rhythm. It feels like home. This is why logic rarely overrides attraction. You can see red flags clearly, and still feel deeply connected. Because the connection is not being chosen by your conscious mind. It is being chosen by the inner child seeking resolution. There is often an unconscious hope. This time, it will be different. This time, if you love better, communicate better, give more, or wait longer, the ending will change. In relationships, this wound shows up as overfunctioning. You take responsibility for emotional closeness. You initiate conversations. You smooth over tension. You excuse behavior that hurts you because you understand where it comes from. You become the emotional regulator. And slowly, you disappear. Another way this wound appears is through fear of abandonment. Even when there is no real threat, your body reacts as if loss is imminent. A delayed text feels heavy. A change in tone feels alarming. You may try to control the situation by seeking reassurance, or by pulling away before you can be hurt. Both are attempts to manage uncertainty. In some cases, the wound expresses itself through avoidance. You desire intimacy, but when it becomes real, your system shuts down. You feel trapped. You lose attraction. You become emotionally distant. This often happens when closeness in childhood felt overwhelming or unsafe. Your inner child learned that proximity equals loss of self. So in adulthood, you keep distance to survive. The same wound can create opposite behaviors, depending on how it was formed. In work relationships, this inner child wound can make authority figures feel emotionally charged. A boss's approval may feel disproportionately important. Criticism may feel devastating. You may overwork to earn validation, or disengage entirely to avoid disappointment. Again, this is not about the present situation. It is about an old emotional template being activated. Financially, this wound can create instability around worth. You may tie your value to performance. When you succeed, you feel briefly okay. When you fail or slow down, your self-esteem collapses. Because the inner child learned that love and safety were not consistent. They had to be earned or maintained. In friendships, you may be the one who reaches out first. The one who remembers birthdays. The one who keeps the connection alive. When others don't reciprocate, you feel hurt, but you rationalize it. You tell yourself not to expect too much. This teaches others how to treat you. At the core of all these patterns is one belief: connection is fragile. And because it feels fragile, you try to protect it. But protection often turns into self-abandonment. From a Jungian perspective, this inner child wound becomes part of the unconscious. It shapes your projections. You project unmet needs onto partners. You see potential instead of reality. You attach to what could be, not what is. When relationships end, the pain often feels disproportionate. It doesn't just hurt. It shatters something inside you. Because it reactivates the original wound. The adult relationship becomes the stage on which the inner child relives an unresolved loss. Healing does not begin by blaming parents or reliving the past endlessly. It begins by recognizing when the inner child is running the present. Notice when your reaction feels younger than your age. When your fear feels out of proportion. When your need for reassurance feels urgent. That urgency is a signal. The inner child is asking to be seen, not acted out. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop asking, "How do I make this relationship work?" and start asking, "What is this relationship activating in me?" That question changes everything. Instead of chasing connection, you begin to build internal safety. You learn to sit with discomfort without abandoning yourself. You learn to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. This is difficult work. It requires slowing down patterns that once felt automatic. But as you do, something changes. You begin to feel attraction shift. You notice that intensity loses its grip. Calm starts to feel interesting. Consistency starts to feel nourishing. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, even boring. That is because your nervous system is learning a new language. The inner child wound does not disappear overnight. But it loses its control when it is no longer unconscious. You stop trying to heal the wound through relationships. You stop choosing partners as medicine. Instead, you become the stable presence your inner child never had. And when that happens, your relationships change not because you tried harder, but because you no longer needed them to fill an old absence. Connection stops being a battlefield. It becomes a meeting. In dating, this inner child wound often reveals itself before you even realize you're attached. You may feel an immediate pull towards someone who is slightly unavailable. They respond, but not consistently. They show interest, but remain ambiguous. This ambiguity creates intensity. You replay interactions in your mind. You analyze tone, timing, and subtle changes. You feel energized and anxious at the same time. This does not feel accidental. It feels meaningful. What is happening is not romantic destiny. It is emotional memory. Your inner child learned early on that connection required vigilance. So when someone is unpredictable, your system wakes up. Attention sharpens. Desire intensifies. This feels like chemistry, but it is actually familiarity. You may notice that when someone is clear, present, and emotionally available, something in you relaxes too much. The spark feels weaker. You may even feel restless or bored. This is not because the person lacks depth, but because your nervous system does not recognize safety as intimacy yet. During early dating, this wound often drives you to overinvest too quickly. You share deeply. You emotionally open early. You mentally plan a future before the foundation exists. This is not naivete. It is an unconscious attempt to secure attachment before it disappears. You may feel a sense of urgency, as if time is limited. As if you must get it right quickly. When the other person pulls back, the pain feels immediate and sharp. Not because of what you lost, but because of what was reactivated. The inner child experiences the withdrawal as a familiar abandonment. In breakups, this wound becomes even more visible. The end of a relationship often feels like a collapse of identity. You don't just miss the person. You miss who you were trying to be with them. You replay conversations, searching for the moment where things changed. You wonder what you did wrong. You imagine alternate outcomes where you could have been better, calmer, less needy, more understanding. This is the inner child trying to rewrite history. The pain feels overwhelming because it is layered. You are not only grieving the relationship. You are grieving every earlier moment when connection felt unsafe or uncertain. This is why breakups can feel regressive. You may feel younger than your age. More vulnerable. More dependent. More lost. Your adult self understands that relationships end. Your inner child experiences it as confirmation that closeness never lasts. This is also why many people return to relationships that were not good for them. Familiar pain feels safer than unknown emptiness. At least familiar pain has structure. Reaching out to an ex can feel like relief, even when you know the dynamic is unhealthy. It temporarily soothes the inner child's fear of being alone. In long-term relationships, the inner child wound shapes how you respond to conflict. Disagreements may feel threatening rather than solvable. Distance may feel intolerable. Silence may feel like rejection. You may rush to fix issues instead of allowing space. Or you may shut down entirely to avoid emotional exposure. Some people become hypercommunicators, trying to resolve everything immediately. Others become emotionally unavailable, retreating into themselves. Both are attempts to manage fear. Over time, this wound can create imbalance. One partner becomes the emotional pursuer, the other the emotional distancer. The pursuer seeks reassurance. The distancer seeks space. This dynamic is not about incompatibility. It is about unresolved attachment patterns. In many long-term relationships, resentment builds quietly. The partner with the wound may feel that they are always reaching, always adjusting, always holding the emotional thread. They may feel unchosen even while being committed to. They may ask themselves why they feel lonely in a relationship. Often, the loneliness comes from not being fully present as themselves. They learned early that love required adaptation. So even in adulthood, they show up filtered. Another common scenario is tolerating behavior that crosses boundaries. You may stay silent when something hurts. You may rationalize dismissiveness, inconsistency, or lack of effort. You tell yourself that relationships are hard. That no one is perfect. That you are being too sensitive. But what you are actually doing is prioritizing connection over self-protection, just as you learned to do as a child. From a depth psychology perspective, especially in the work of Carl Jung, unresolved inner child wounds operate unconsciously through projection. You don't see the partner clearly. You see them through the lens of unmet needs. You hope they will finally provide the safety you lacked. This creates unrealistic expectations and chronic disappointment. Healing begins when you recognize that adult relationships are not meant to repair childhood wounds. They can support healing, but they cannot be the source of it. When you stop asking your partner to be the parent your inner child needed, the relationship changes. This does not mean becoming emotionally distant or self-sufficient to the point of isolation. It means learning to self-regulate. Learning to sit with discomfort without immediately seeking reassurance or withdrawal. In dating, healing may look like slowing down. Allowing attraction to develop gradually. Noticing how someone treats you over time instead of how intense the connection feels early on. In breakups, healing may look like allowing grief without self-blame. Recognizing that the pain belongs partly to the past. Giving yourself compassion instead of analysis. In long-term relationships, healing may look like honest communication without urgency. Expressing needs without fear of abandonment. Allowing space without panic. As you do this work, something subtle but profound happens. Your attraction shifts. You feel less drawn to emotional chaos. You feel more drawn to steadiness. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. Even uncomfortable. Your nervous system has to learn that calm does not equal disinterest. Over time, intimacy stops feeling like effort. It stops feeling like something you must maintain through vigilance. You begin to experience relationships as places of rest rather than repair. The inner child wound does not disappear. But it stops dictating your choices. You become the stable presence your inner child was searching for in others. And from that place, love becomes something you share, not something you chase.
If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more gentle reminders of your inner power.